This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for July the 24th through the 30th. On this week's show, a woman with a big dream to take over the world and a legendary supergroup both debut. A movie with a classic soundtrack by a legend helps to create a new sound. A rebellious singer passes away, and Dylan plugs in and freaks out folk music fans. Literally. We start with the date July 27th. July 27th was a big date in 1980s music lore because of a couple different events. First, Madonna was just a young woman with a dream at one point. She went to college at the University of Michigan on a dance scholarship but wanted to go into ballet. At that point, she decided to drop out of college and do what any normal person with a dream would do. She moved halfway across the country to New York City with $35 in her pocket and pursued her dream. She started out with the usual small backup dancing gigs and working in fast food, specifically Dunkin' Donuts, and she also spent some time overseas doing performing gigs. During one of her backup gigs in America, she met a musician by the name of Dan Gilroy. They moved in together and formed a band called The Breakfast Club. She played guitar, drums, and also sang. After a while, she left the band and formed another band called Emmy and the Emmys with Stephen Bray, who was a former boyfriend from back in her Michigan days. By this point, dance had taken a backseat and she was all in on her music future. She decided that if she was going to land a record deal, she would have to do it as a solo act, even though she and Stephen Bray were still writing songs together for the group Emmy and the Emmys. Eventually, one of her demo tracks found its way to Sire Records, who signed her to a record deal. She released a couple of dance songs, which did really well on the Billboard dance charts, even though nobody knew who she was at that time. Her first song, Everybody, was released in late 1982 and hit number 3 on the chart, while Burning Up was released in March of 1983 and hit top 5 on the chart. At that point, she decided that it was time to stop making singles and to make her album. Her debut album was originally produced by Reggie Lucas, who had worked with R&B artists like Roberta Flack. However, Madonna wasn't really happy with it, so she went to her new boyfriend, producer Jelly Bean Benitez. He remixed some of the tracks on the album, and on July 27, 1983, Madonna's self-titled debut album was released. Critically, it was sort of well-received, we'll say. Rolling Stone magazine said that she had an irritating voice. Other critics, though, thought that it was pretty catchy. Critics didn't matter, though. The album did a slow burn up the Billboard albums chart, peaking at number 8 and eventually selling 5 million copies. It was helped by the release of the singles Holiday, Borderline, and Lucky Star. Other songs on the album were Burning Up, I Know It, Physical Attraction, Think of Me, and Everybody. It was during this time that she and stylist Maripol cultivated her style, with the lingerie being worn on top of regular clothes, lots of chains, fishnet stockings, and bracelets. You know, stylists never get enough credit for what they do when they work with an artist. Just saying. Anyway, by the time Madonna's second album, Like a Virgin, came out, she was ready to take over the world. Her success even boosted some of the people who had helped her out originally. Jelly Bean Benitez became a sought-after producer and DJ. These days, he runs one of the channels over on Sirius XM Radio. Madonna even wrote and did backup vocals on Jelly Bean's 1984 single Sidewalk Talk, which became the 20th biggest club song of 1985, according to Billboard magazine. One of Madonna's groups, Breakfast Club, got their own record deal. They released an album that spawned the smash hit Right on Track. By that time, Stephen Bray had joined the band along with Dan Gilroy. Awkward? Anyway, the group were nominated for a Best New Artist Grammy in 1988, losing out to Terence Trent D'Arby. After they broke up, Stephen Bray went back to writing songs with Madonna, among many other artists such as the Jets and Regina. All of this became possible, though, because of the release on July the 27th, 1983, of the debut album by the woman with the dream to take over the world, as she said to Dick Clark on her appearance in American Bandstand, Madonna. On to the second July the 27th event. In 1983, Prince was touring to support his fifth album, 1999. His management team decided that he should next try to work his way into movies, like a lot of musicians do. The concept for the movie was based on Prince's life, but wasn't an exact biography, just bits and pieces. The film was written by Albert Magnoli and William Blinn. However, since the original script was kind of dark, Magnoli decided to rewrite it and also direct it. Prince's managers produced the movie. The casting for the female lead was a little tricky. Singer Vanity was supposed to be the original choice. However, before the filming started, she left the group Vanity 6, who were one of Prince's side projects. Prince decided to recast the lead role, so he offered it to Jennifer Beals, who turned it down in order to complete college. She still did pretty well with her career, though, without it. Just saying. The role was then offered to Apollonia Cotero, who accepted it. The movie was filmed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The First Avenue nightclub, where all of the concert shots were filmed, closed down for 25 days in order to film there. They were paid $100,000 for their troubles. That's just over $300,000 in today's money. They're also a tourist attraction now because the film did so well, so they became a tourist spot. The soundtrack album was the second album to also credit his band The Revolution, as they did help to write some of the songs. Certain songs have a bit of a history. Let's Go Crazy is probably the best crafted song about moral ethics ever to be made. The line towards the end of the song, though, about how pills, thrills, and daffodils will kill is kind of ironic considering how Prince passed away. The famous drum machine intro after the organs in the beginning with the whole "Dearly Beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life." Well, that drum machine is Prince's go-to drum machine, the Linn LM1. Take Me With You was supposed to be for his side project Apollonia 6, but instead found its way onto the soundtrack. Contrary to popular belief, the female voice on the song is not Apollonia's, and it is not Wendy or Lisa from the band. It's singer Jill Jones. Computer Blue was originally a 14-minute song, but got cut back. The original version, I believe, is on the special edition of the soundtrack, which I think the estate has already released, at least a couple years ago. Prince played all of the instruments on The Beautiful Ones and Darling Nikki, along with When Doves Cry. For Doves, he was trying to go with a different sound, so he ended up pulling the bass line out of the song. I Would Die For You, Baby I'm a Star, and Purple Rain were all actually recorded a year before the movie came out. At a benefit concert for the Minnesota Dance Theater on August 3, 1983 at the now famous First Avenue Club, the aforementioned First Avenue Club, Prince debuted those three songs as well as his new guitarist for The Revolution, Wendy Melvoin. The history of Darling Nikki was that it was partially responsible for censorship labels. A teenage girl was listening to Darling Nikki in her house one day when her mother walked into the room and was horrified to hear the lyrics. The girl's mother was Tipper Gore, whose husband at the time was then Senator, eventual Vice President and Father of Earth and the Internet, Al Gore. Tipper started an advocacy group called the PMRC, or Parents Music Resource Center, whose group put out a list of songs called the Filthy 15, with Darling Nikki being front and center on that list. Tipper and her new powerful political group used their political connections to get Tipper's husband Al to do a dog and pony show for a congressional hearing where senators could look like they were being tough on the music industry. In the end, as you would expect, the music industry heads did cave, and they agreed to put censorship stickers on their albums and singles. If you're wondering what the censorship stickers are, yeah, they're those things that you now ignore, so awesome. Back then, they actually just made kids like me buy whatever had a sticker on it, because if it was going to piss off my parents, then I was going to buy it. In other words, it was a brilliant marketing move for the record label. So good job, Tipper. Good job. Goodness. Anyway, the title track for the album has its own history. According to the Revolution's keyboardist, Dr. Fink, Prince wanted to write a song that sounded almost like it could have come from Bob Seger. The band Journey, though, tells a different story, which actually makes more sense. According to them, Prince called them up one day and mentioned that he had written a song that sounded a lot like their hit song, Faithfully. He wanted their blessing so that, of course, they wouldn't sue him. Not only did they give him their blessing once they heard the song, but they thanked him for asking them, since a lot of the bands of that era were just ripping off their sound without even asking them first. And if you actually listen to the songs Purple Rain and Faithfully back to back, you can definitely hear the similarities, especially in the chord progression. The first single for the soundtrack album, When Doves Cry, was released on May 16, 1984. Purple Rain, the album, came out on June 25, 1984, and spent 32 weeks on the Billboard Albums Chart's top 10, finally taking the number one spot for 24 straight weeks. By the time the movie was released on July 27, 1984, the world was ready to see the visuals that went with the album. The movie became a big hit. With a budget of $7.2 million, it went on to make $80 million worldwide. Purple Rain, the movie and soundtrack, made rumpled pirate shirts a fashion trend, along with being the basis for a famous Seinfeld episode. It also gave Prince a lot of awards, including Grammys, a Golden Globe, and an Academy Award for Best Music Score. It also is considered a classic album and one of the greatest albums ever made. The movie made stars of pretty much everyone associated with it, everybody from Apollonia to the group The Time. The Minneapolis Sound, as it was called back then, became the next musical trend, spawning groups like Tamara and the Scene, to Sheila E., to Ready for the World, to Maserati. Prince's career, of course, went to the next level, and he has achieved superstardom at that time. And it all started when Purple Rain, the film, premiered on July 27, 1984 in movie theaters. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. In 1985, Prince was in an extremely creative zone. Not only was he riding high off the success of Purple Rain, he was also working on his next album, Around the World in a Day, along with material for the next official album after that called Parade, a solo album as an alter ego called Camille, and an album with his band The Revolution called Dream Factory. Both Dream Factory and Camille would be reworked into Prince's album Sign of the Times, and also Crystal Ball, which was released by his estate after his untimely death in 2016. While Prince was doing all of that, he was also producing and doing side projects with other bands. One of those side projects was with a group called The Family. They released one album called The Family because, as we all know by now, you cannot officially be considered a recording artist unless you name an album after yourself. Those are facts. Look it up. Anyway, there was one song on that album that Prince wrote that, much like the album that it came from, received very little attention, at least not from the public. As it turns out, one artist did notice the song and wrote it to international superstardom. Sinead O'Connor was born on December 8, 1966 in Dublin, Ireland as the third of 5 children. Here's a fun fact for you. She was actually born literally 13 days before me. I was born in Lincolnshire, England. She was born in Dublin, Ireland. Twinsies. Not really, but in any event, just my little personal fact for you. Anywho, Sinead released her critically hailed debut album, The Lion and the Cobra, in 1988, which, to be honest, is my absolute favorite album of hers. That album had some cult hits on it, like Lay Your Hands on Me, Troy and Mandinka, which earned her a Best Female Rock Vocal Performance Grammy nomination. In 1989, Sinead got to work on her sophomore album. As she was working on material for the album, she came across the family's version of Prince's song. The song about loss struck a chord in Sinead that reminded her of the loss of her mother, who she said abused her as a child, but who was killed in a car accident in 1985 before Sinead had made a name for herself. Sinead recorded a 5-minute, 10-second power ballad version of the song, Nothing Compares to You, with her producer, Nellie Hooper. Her record label, Chrysalis, put it on her new album, I Do Not Want What I Have Not Got, and released the song on January 8, 1990. The John Mayberry-directed music video for it had just a single camera trained on her face with an all-black background, with a couple of cuts of Sinead walking through the Parc de Saint-Cloud in Paris, France, thrown in for a few seconds at least. The parts where she's crying in the music video while she's singing were real. Those were actually real tears for the video. They were not computer edited. Both the single and the music video were international smash hits. The single went top 5 in 20 different countries. 18 of them went to number 1, including America, while the album that it came from topped the charts as well. Critically, the song was huge with extremely good reviews. Sinead was lauded for her vocal skills in the song, going from anger to a whisper and back again over and over and not missing a beat while doing it. When you hear her singing that song, you would swear that she was the one who wrote it because you believe she's feeling everything that she's singing in real time. Sinead's version of the song has also made a ton of the greatest songs of the 90s and of all time lists. The single went on to be nominated for a bunch of awards, including a few Grammy Awards, while the music video cleaned house at that year's MTV Video Music Awards, winning Best Female Video, Best Postmodern Video, and Video of the Year, making Sinead the first female artist to take home the coveted Video of the Year prize. In 1993, Prince would release his own recording of the song, but as beautiful as his version is, Sinead just nailed it better. And it's one of those times that a cover version of a song is actually better than the original. However, Nothing Compares to You and Purple Rain were the two songs most used when Prince would tragically pass away in 2016. In fact, there was a worldwide radio simulcast of Sinead's version of Nothing Compares to You exactly 15 days and 7 hours after Prince passed away in honor of the lyric that starts off the song, It's been 7 hours and 15 days since you took your love away. In short, it is an extremely well-written song, as you would expect Prince to have written, along with one of the most emotional, gut-punching vocal performances of the past 50 years, masterfully sung by Sinead O'Connor. Every generation kind of needs an artist who pushes the buttons and agitates in order for some conversations to start up. Sinead was definitely one of those artists for Generation X. In fact, she was a wrecking ball, but it was her cost for having strong opinions and having a voice to say them, and she gladly paid that price. In order to understand Sinead's impact, you have to remember the times and the place that she came from. Ultraconservatism was huge in the Western world in the 1980s and even into the late 90s. Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush were the presidents in that era. The moral majority Christian conservatives were in control of the media and government in America. In the United Kingdom, Margaret Thatcher and John Major were prime ministers during this time. In Ireland, you had the battles and the bloodshed between the Catholics and the Protestants, and also the power of the Catholic Church. The Irish part is what molded Sinead. The American part is what almost crushed her career completely, or rather, as she put it, the career her record label wanted her to have. After the success of both the song and the album, Sinead became one of more than a few artists who bit the hand that fed her and rightfully railed against the music industry, famously boycotting the Grammy Awards in 1991 at the height of her popularity. She boycotted a performance on Saturday Night Live when it was announced that the guest host that night was shock comedian Andrew Dice Clay, who was known at the time for making misogynistic jokes. She said that she would not play in a stadium that played the American national anthem before her concert, which got Frank Sinatra so angry that he said during his own performance that he would, quote, kick her ass, end quote. She took on the subject of abuse that was done by the Catholic Church by ripping up a photo of the Pope during a performance on Saturday Night Live on October 3rd, 1992, and then screamed, "Fight the real enemy," which got her into a ton of trouble and derailed her career in America for a time anyway. During the next week's episode of Saturday Night Live, guest host Joe Pesci held up the retaped photo of the Pope and said that if he were the host that night, he would have hit her, to which the audience applauded loudly because hitting women is good? I mean, between Joe Pesci and Frank Sinatra wanting to hit and kick her. Anyway, even famous church agitator Madonna went after Sinead for doing what she did, though most people pointed out Madonna's hypocrisy and history and figured that Madonna was just using it for some extra publicity for a photo book that she was selling at the time. A few weeks after that, Sinead was booed mightily at a Bob Dylan tribute concert. On stage, fellow performer Chris Christopherson kept her close to him, protecting her from the crowd, gave her a big hug, and said to her, "Don't let the bastards get you down." Funny thing was, Sinead was years ahead of her time in protesting the abuses of the Catholic Church, as the accusations of abuse by priests and the cover-up by the Catholic Church would start to become news in the media and in the court systems worldwide about a decade or so later, so way ahead of her time. Then there was Sinead's search for meaning in her life through different religions. She was ordained as a minister in the Latin Trinitine Church, which is a denomination of the Catholic Church that is not under the Pope's control. That happened in 1999. She then converted to Islam in 2018. As people have aptly pointed out, she had her struggles with mental health issues for decades, including being hospitalized after sending out tweets where she was crying out for help. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Her son Shane, whom she lost custody of when he was 13 to Shane's father due to her mental health issues, lost his life in early 2022. Throughout all of this, Sinead put out 9 more albums after the success of I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, and while they did not have the same success in America that the album did, her other albums did garner her a bunch of various award nominations. In 2021, she released her memoirs and announced her retirement from the music industry. There was recent talk that she was working on a new album that was going to be put out in 2024 and that a tour would soon follow. However, on July 26, 2023, Sinead O'Connor passed away from natural causes in London, England, at the age of 56. In death, there have, of course, been the usual tributes from celebrities, some who knew her, and most who didn't but act like they did because they saw her at an event here or there. I guess that actually counts as friendship in celebrity circles. Only the few people whom she called friends were really there for her when she needed them. Others either made fun of her issues while she was alive or talked down to her when she would offer advice to not sexualize themselves for the music industry, which was the exact advice that she gave Miley Cyrus when Miley was going through that phase in her career, to which Miley attacked Sinead and told her to seek help. Sinead also said wild things about celebrities sometimes during her many mental health episodes, such as accusing Arsenio Hall and Eddie Murphy of being the ones who had given Prince the painkillers, especially in 2016. Still, in an era when no one stood up for anything or only pushed buttons because it either got them attention or a payday, much like today's era of influencers and reality show stars, Sinead stood up for what she felt was right and stood against what she felt was wrong, regardless of the personal or professional cost. She spoke out about racism, especially in the music industry, abuse, a woman's right to choose, the events in Northern Ireland at that time, and human rights. And she never backed down from anything or anyone unless she felt that she might have aimed her weapon of choice at the wrong person, which did happen sometimes. See the Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall comments. She was also open and honest about everything in her life, including her own fallacies. Even her signature shaved head was partially an act of rebellion, since her record label wanted her to grow her hair long to make her, in their words, quote, more feminine, end quote. Sinead wasn't about sexualizing herself for her fans. She let her music do the talking for her because Lord knows she left it all out there in her music for everyone to see. In short, Sinead O'Connor was a badass. The world could use more people like Sinead. Unfortunately, her like rarely walk the earth, especially these days. The death of the incomparable, iconic, rebellious Sinead O'Connor, July 26, 2023, from natural causes in London, England, at the age of 56. I'm not going to do my usual birthday person breakdowns this week because of these next two events. However, let me shout out some happy birthdays this week to a few big ones like Sir Mick Jagger of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame icons, the Rolling Stones, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Kate Bush, blues legend and Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Buddy Guy, Geddy Lee of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame group Rush, the entertainer who can seemingly do everything, Miss Jennifer Lopez, and Broadway sensation Kristen Chenoweth of Wicked fame, you might say. Now, on to the next story. On July 26, 1965, an event so destructive to the sanctity of life itself took place that it is still talked about today. Women still cry. Hippies with long hair still smoke before telling the dark, twisted tale of how Bob Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Seriously, people, this was a huge deal back then, at least to the folk crowd anyway. I'll explain. See, back in the early to mid-1960s, Bob Dylan was huge. I'm not sure how to describe it in today's terms because there was really no one like him these days. That's probably why he's still so revered. Anyway, in the 60s, folk music became all the rage. The group The Byrds kind of kicked it into the mainstream when their cover of Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man broke through, but by then Dylan was already the king of folk music. That was helped in no small part to his performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964. He was introduced then by Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers, who said, quote, "And here he is, take him, you know him, he's yours," end quote. Folk people apparently took that to heart. To them, Bob Dylan was the Pied Piper. By the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, which was held at Festival Field, the crowd that proclaimed him as theirs was ready for their Lord and Savior to return. What this crowd didn't realize was by that time, Dylan was going in a completely different direction. Only months earlier, he decided not to go with an acoustic sound and instead embrace the electric guitar. He recorded the now classic Like a Rolling Stone months earlier and released it only 5 days before his appearance at the festival, so the crowd really wasn't ready for this new sound of his. So, how would they react? Well, not good. In fact, hate doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. Bob went on stage, plugged in his guitar, and went into an electric version of his acoustic hit Maggie's Farm. The crowd went wild, and by wild I mean they booed, screamed, and said some really not nice things to him. One guy even famously called him Judas. Bob continued the set with Like a Rolling Stone. It takes a lot to laugh. It takes a train to cry, with the 2-song acoustic encore of It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, and Mr. Tambourine Man. Dylan was actually shocked by the reaction, but his decision was final. He continued playing and recording with the electric guitar and continued with his vision. It's not clear if his crowd ever forgave him for changing his style, but it really didn't matter. So yes, kids, Dylan going electric really was a big deal back then, and yes, it did freak out your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. And Bob did it all at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25th, 1965. The group Cream was the first rock supergroup and one of the most brilliant groups of the late 1960s, with 4 albums that lit the rock world on fire. As brilliant and talented as they were, though, they were also one of the most volatile. The volatility eventually drove them apart, and it would take decades before they would play together again. The group was a byproduct of other very successful groups of the 60s. Eric Clapton was, at that time, already considered one of the greatest blues guitarists of all time, or as a famous wall graffiti said, Clapton is God. He had played with the Yardbirds and was just leaving John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Drummer Ginger Baker was leaving the Graham Bond organization, and bassist Jack Bruce had left the Graham Bond organization rather unceremoniously. One night after watching Clapton perform with John Mayall, Baker gave Clapton a ride back to Clapton's home in London. During that ride, Baker mentioned that he was starting a new band and wanted Clapton to join him. Eric said yes, but only if Jack Bruce could join and play bass. Baker, according to Clapton, almost crashed the car when he mentioned Bruce. See, Clapton and Bruce originally met when they were in the Blues Breakers and then in a side project band with Steve Winwood of Traffic and Paul Jones of Manfred Mann called Powerhouse. From Eric's standpoint, Jack was good people. Ginger and Jack, though? Yeah, not so kosher. Actually, to say that Ginger and Jack did not get along is an understatement. See, while they were in the Graham Bond organization, they would break each other's instruments. Things got so bad that they had fights while on stage. Ginger had Jack fired from Graham Bond, but Jack still showed up at the gigs like he was still in the band, at least until one night when Ginger pulled a knife and threatened Jack with it. Ginger really wanted Eric to join the band, and Eric really wanted Jack to join the band, so Ginger and Jack agreed to at least try to get along and make this band work, much like how parents try to stay together for the sake of the children. The band officially was formed on July 16, 1966, and considered going by the name Sweet and Sour Rock and Roll, then The Cream, before finally going by the name Cream. It was decided that Jack would take lead singing duty since Eric was pretty shy about singing at that time. The trio performed together for the first time on July 29, 1966 at the Twisted Wheel nightclub in Manchester, England. Since they didn't have a lot of original songs worked up, they put their own spin on blues classics and played 3 songs that night. A cover of Willie Dixon's Spoonful, a cover of Robert Johnson's Crossroad Blues, and a cover of Skip James's I'm So Glad. On October 1st, 1966, they became a quartet for one night when a fan of Clapton's who had just started to make a name for himself in London asked to sit in with the group. The man was so good that Clapton said that he had to leave the stage, dumbfounded by what he had just witnessed. He then went up to the guitar player's manager, Chas Chandler, formerly of the group The Animals, and reportedly said, quote, "You told me he was good. You didn't tell me he was that good." End quote. That guest guitarist who announced his presence that night with authority to London, that was Jimi Hendrix before the Experience. Cream's first album was Fresh Cream and was released late in 1966. The album performed okay on the charts, going to number 6 in Great Britain and number 39 in America. The writing duties were split pretty much between the 3 of them. When they came to America to play some gigs, it wasn't really a big deal, as people still didn't know who they were. At the time, Clapton was only well known to other musicians in America. He wasn't a household name, as he had left the Yardbirds before that band made it big in America. When Cream first played, they were in the middle of the lineups at music festivals, and sometimes they only got to play one song and then they had to leave. Still, it didn't stop them from coming back to America to record their next album, Disraeli Gears. That album was recorded in 5 days in May of 1967 in New York City and was released in November. The album had the Cream classics Sunshine of Your Love and Tales of Brave Ulysses. It also showed the range of the band as they combined psychedelic and blues rock. Right after they finished recording the album, they played in San Francisco and Los Angeles. At that point, they decided to make a name for themselves with legendary shows where they played some songs for 20 minutes each. By the time their third album, the double album Wheels of Fire, came out in 1968, they were kings, with Wheels going to number 1 in America on the strength of songs like White Room. The problem was that by then, well, the band had gotten sick of touring and doing extended jam sessions on stage. Of course, the tension between Bruce and Baker became a problem again. Clapton always had to be the middleman, but even he was getting sick of dealing with it. According to legend, Clapton decided that he was through with Cream after Rolling Stone magazine reviewer and also future Bruce Springsteen producer, Mr. John Landau, gave the band and Clapton a really bad review, calling Clapton, quote, "the king of the blues cliché," end quote. The band announced that they were done in 1968. However, they were talked into doing one final album. Called Goodbye, it was recorded towards the end of 1968 and was released in early 1969. The song Badge was on that album. What has been forgotten throughout the decades is that by the time Goodbye came out, Cream had already left. They played a final tour, played 2 concerts in London that were recorded, and in late 1968, they called it quits. Baker and Clapton then got Steve Winwood to join them in making another supergroup called Blind Faith. Clapton then went on to Delaney and Bonnie, Derek and the Dominoes, until having an extremely successful solo career. Ginger Baker, meanwhile, went on to form Ginger Baker's Air Force, while Bruce went on to have a so-so solo career, you might say. 25 years after they broke up, they got back together and performed when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Based on that performance, they decided to do some limited concerts together, but due to other projects, the trio didn't actually do a reunion tour until 2005, with mixed results. There was talk around 2007 about doing another concert, but that never happened. Of course, now there is zero chance of doing a reunion, as Jack Bruce passed away in 2014, Ginger Baker passed away in 2019, and Clapton announced that due to bad health with his muscle control, he cannot perform as much anymore, at least not go on a complete tour anymore. The supergroup Cream played their first gig at the Twisted Wheel nightclub in Manchester, England on July 29th, 1966. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for July the 24th through the 30th. Thank you very, very much for listening. And if you're on YouTube or Spotify, thanks for watching.